All right, and I'm going to go ahead and share my content. Okay, thank you. And when I share my screen, I'm going to turn off my camera just to help a little bit with bandwidth here. Let's just go ahead and do that. Oops, hang on. And maybe my camera didn't go off. Right, we'll see how this goes. All right. So I'm Donna Caldwell. I'm a senior solutions consultant for education from Adobe. And today what we're going to focus on are ways to create accessible PDFs from more of a beginner level. We know that there are accessibility checkers inside of Acrobat. There's a lot of information you can get back from that. But in the end, if you don't know how to go in and manipulate a document, specifically a PDF, then you may not get the results that you want because the accessibility checker is going to say this is wrong. It's going to try to do the best it can. But unfortunately, there is not a staples button that will magically turn any document into a accessible PDF. And we're going to talk about those reasons why and what artificial intelligence can do, but really what takes a human brain to differentiate in order to make a document truly accessible. I also want to mention a particular individual. His name is Rob Haverty. Rob is a senior product manager in our Adobe Document Cloud Accessibility. Rob has just years and years of experience in accessibility, especially in the document cloud, and he actually does quite a few pre-conference webinars and seminars. I don't know if you're familiar with a conference called Higher Ground. It's a yearly conference for accessibility, and he typically does a pre-conference for that. What I wanted to let you know at the beginning, normally I like to go through resources and other places you can go at the end, but just in case anyone has to leave early, I want you to have this information. This deck is going to be uploaded to a location in a PDF format that you can get access to. In it, it has the directions of just about everything I'm going to do today. It also has at the end a list of webinars and resources. And what I want to bring your attention to is this section called webinar recordings. Rob, at our request, so many of our customers were asking for meetings on accessibility that Rob went through and recorded all of his pre-conference accessibility recordings. These are absolutely free to you, and they are wonderful. They go into depth into several topics. Let me just show you what that looks like when you click on that link. This is the accessibility series. You can see that each one has a more defined and in-depth coverage. So what I'm going to be covering, most of that is going to be handled in Introduction to PDF Accessibility, since this is supposed to be a webinar that is for people who are beginning this. But there are far more immersive sections if you go in here. For instance, we are going to have Adobe's having a session right after this one on forms. So how are you going to make those forms accessible? And session 6, you don't have to do these in order, by the way, is specifically about creating those forms so that you have a better chance of making those as accessible as possible. We also have things like complex lists and complex tables that go beyond the basically kind of the introductory level that I'm going to provide here. In addition to that, there is a link called webinars. Anytime you want to know what upcoming webinars are happening in the document cloud, just go ahead and bookmark that link and it will give you what webinars are coming in the future. And many of those end up becoming on-demand webinars as well. In addition to that, this deck is going to have links to some helpful links and resources. I'm also going to leave this slide in. This is Rob Haverty's contact information. If you run into a complex accessibility issue that you want to report to Adobe, you want to get some feedback on, Rob is always. Did anyone need something? Okay. Rob is always open to getting emails about anything that he can learn, because what we know about accessibility is accessibility remediation is always changing. And this isn't just due to Adobe and us constantly improving our accessibility features in Acrobat, but it also has to do with companies like Microsoft, who are also continually improving accessibility features in their products. All right, let's start here. Let's just talk just a moment about the PDF UI and ISO 142891, which is a subset of the ISO 32000 for accessibility. It provides text, structure, and organization of the content to assistive technologies. And that's what this is about. We're not talking necessarily about an application where we need people who need assistive technologies to create something. In most cases, the reason we want an accessible PDF is because we want people to be able to use assistive technologies to listen or to better view that PDF. The main point here, and this is what I'm going to be focusing on this entire webinar, is how the tag tree has become really that important and central point to creating that logical reorder. And that is the absolute must of an accessibility remediation workflow. There are some things that must be done a certain way, and other things that may be done a certain way. And I'm going to use lists as an example. We're going to talk about this a little bit more when we talk about lists. The individual list items shall be specified, but there are parts of lists that may be included. So for example, L1 tags are absolutely necessary to indicate that there is a list, but basically the body copy within that list is a maybe. Now I'm going to take the approach that because the standard asks for these things, I do it. But I'll try to make sure that I include information about whether an assistive technology reader is going to see any difference in that. In addition to this standard, you can also define your own specific rules. Here's another part of this that a lot of people do not understand, and that is that the source document is supreme and has a very, very important part of that workflow that determines whether this is going to be easy to make accessible or it's going to be very difficult. So what we want to do is take advantage of any accessibility checkers and tools in that source document. Coincidentally, Microsoft Word has some really great accessibility tools when you are creating a Word document. And if you use those, you're going to have a much easier job with any extra tasks you need to do in an Acrobat. So a question you need to find out from anyone who is trying to create an accessible document is, does the author know how to create that accessible document? And in Word, for example, styles are really important because included in those styles, proper headings and proper heading numbers is going to help Microsoft Word determine that tag logical order. It's almost always easier to remediate significant problems in a source document than after it's converted to a PDF document. All right. Another thing I want to bring up is the fact that not all PDF reading tools are equal. This is one of the reasons that we hope people will use a Adobe Acrobat Reader, because we know that the standard is always included in that. But it's just kind of like HTML. Not all web browsers are alike. So for instance, you may use Google's version of a PDF reader, and it won't include all of the information that you would have from a reader that supports the Acrobat standard, or I should say the PDF standard. This is going to be true for assistive technology as well. These are the screen readers. Not all of those screen readers are the same. And I'm not saying not to use things like JAWS and other ones, but just be aware that there are differences. One screen reader that is a kind of an open source is the NVDA screen reader. Adobe does help contribute funds to make sure that that is up to date with the standards. So what are your best results going to be? PDF UA tagged document, a screen reader that you know includes the interface that you need and the features you need to make an individual accessing these technologies successful, and also Acrobat Reader. And remember, Reader is free to anyone. We have, Adobe Acrobat Reader on the phone, and we have Acrobat Reader at the desktop level. All right, I'm going to jump over now to a document. So let me go in here to a PDF. And we're going to start by talking about heading structure. That's the first thing we're going to do here. And let me go over here to the right. You see three basically panels over here for anyone who is not as familiar with Acrobat. The default ones are these first two or three. You will probably have to add these so that you can click on them at any point you need them. How do you do that? One way to quickly do it is to just go underneath the last option, right click, and you'll see all the other panels that are available. So the three that you're going to want to include is content, right here. You're going to want to include order. And most importantly, you're going to want to make sure tags is there. This is where we are going to be able to interface with that tag tree for pretty much most of this webinar. All right, once they're placed there, you're going to have them every time you open up the application. And there are lots of little mini tutorials that we have too on the Acrobat website if you have further questions about that as well. All right, let's talk about Microsoft Word for the moment. One of the biggest things that I see, and I was a consultant for 20 years before I joined Adobe, and I went into companies to help them create better user documents, and a lot of people started with a Word document. But what they did is they used regular paragraphs, or they used heading levels that they thought looked good instead of for the functionality of what it was. So let's use this document as an example. We have a second level heading, but it uses Microsoft's heading 5 because the user thought that that looked better. What's a much better way to deal with this is to customize your headings in Word. So for example, if you really liked the look of this one, change the heading 1 or the heading 2 to be the look and feel that you want. Use those settings, and you can, Microsoft is a very thorough creation tool in the sense that I can use those for other documents as well. As I look to the left here, I see something that says tags. Tags is not a tag. It's just basically starting this tag tree. Your first tag is sect, S-E-C-T. If it has angle brackets, it's a tag. If it does not have angle brackets, it does not. Now I'm going to double click on that, and when I do, it's going to select everything that it sees under this particular section. They're outlined in purple boxes. If you have an older version of Acrobat, you may see these in blue boxes. And I would like to suggest too, this is specific to accessibility because I know there are people out there who use all kinds of versions of Acrobat. If you are focused on accessibility, always try to use the most current version. And I'm honestly saying this not because I want you to purchase more Acrobat, it's because every generation includes more and more accessibility tools, simpler, streamlined workflows, and more powerful features that allow you to create accessible PDFs faster and easier. And I know when Rob does his webinars, he talks about, how it used to be and how it is now, and how it took you 20 steps before, it takes you 3 steps now. But I'm sure I have a lot of new accessibility people in this beginning webinar, so I'm not going to spend the time to do that. But suffice it to say that it's become much easier over time. Now I'm going to go down to H4. When I double click on this, you'll notice you see a blue rectangle filled in around that element. So it's saying this document obviously has an incorrect heading, and the reason for that is it starts with an H4. In the rules for an accessible PDF, you must start with an H1. You can have multiple H1s on a page, unlike HTML, where you're required often to have one H1 per page, but these have to be in consecutive order. So let me just give you an example of this. I could say I have an H1, an H2, an H3, another H1, an H2, an H1, an H1. But what I can't do is what we're seeing here. I can't start with an H4 and then move to an H5. So I'm going to need to change this H4 to an H1. Now, don't worry about the fidelity of the look of the document. I'm just going to show you a quick example of this. I'm going to go in, click again. Now you see that there's a box going across this whole area, which is going to allow me to make my cursor be an insertion cursor. I'm going to change this from a 4 to a 1, and I'm going to press Tab. That's made the change, but notice that nothing visually changed with the document. It's very important as part of what a PDF is that the integrity of the look and feel of the document is maintained. So even though we have changed the back end information about this heading, we have not changed the look and feel of it. So now let's go to the next one. I see, again, I've got a problem here. I'm going from an H1 to an H5, which I can't do. I need to go from an H1 to an H2. So again, I'm going to double click. It's selected. I always want to be checking over on this area to the right to make sure that I've selected the text that I think I have. And I'm going to go ahead and edit this. Now, there's another way that I can edit any element. You may not always know what is the correct abbreviation for a specific editorial element, whether that's a heading or a figure or a list or a table. And if you're not sure, what you can do is right click. I'm going to go to properties. And I can use this drop down list to choose the editorial element in a, for lack of a better term, for a spelled out description of what that is rather than the abbreviation. And in this case, I know I want a heading level 2. So I click on heading level 2. And by the way, you do not need a title in the object properties for this. When we get to figures, we will talk about alternative text or alternate text. When I close, I can see that this is now an H2. And then I can continue down through this. I double click on this H1 here. I can see that that has been properly tagged. I've got an H2. That's exactly what I want. And I can go forward from there. All right. Let's go to a simple list. So let me open up this document. And by the way, all of the files that I'm using in this webinar are going to be included in a, we're not quite sure how it's going to be delivered, but we're going to have a way for you to download any of these files that I'm using today, just because it's a nice way to go back over what we did. You can compare that to the presentation, which is giving instructions. And in fact, the documents themselves have descriptions about what the problem is and how to rectify it. All right, so this one I want to open up is Word demo with errors. Okay. All right, let's talk about a simple list. Again, I'm going to make the tag tree visible by clicking on that tag. And I can see that if I continue down through this to try to find this list of Canadian provinces by population, let's just double click on some of these. So that's an H, they've made that an H3, when really that should have been a list tag. Now, this can happen for several reasons, right? The most common one is that the individual really liked the look of a heading 3 and then regular paragraphs for the list. We need to make this change. So what we're going to do is I want to put my focus on the tag that introduces the list. And that's what I've done right here. List of Canadian provinces by population. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to say, I want a new tag. Because this isn't a tag I necessarily want to change. I want to make sure that this whole section is introduced with a list. And again, I'm going to use that, whoop, just a second here. Let me go back out. Sorry about that. And that's not giving me what I want. I don't think I have it highlighted. Hang on. I'm not sure why it's not giving me that list that I'm looking for here. Let's do this. Oh, I just love it when a demo goes perfectly well. Well, I'm going to change this instead. All right, let's do this for now. And we can see that we have an angle bracket, L angle bracket. So that's the introduction of the list. But I can see that these body paragraphs, essentially just paragraphs following this, are at the same level. What I need these to be, two things. I need these to be part of the list content and identified as so. I also need them to be nested underneath this so that when I collapse list, the entire list and the tag tree collapses. So let me double click on this first one. And I can do this in a larger selection. I don't have to do these individually. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to hold down my shift key and I'm going to move down, watching at the same time the content to the right, making sure that I stop when I have all of that list content. And then I'm going to right click, go to my properties, and change these to list items. You can see that they've all become list items. But I have one more step, right? I need, even though these are now list items, I need these to be nested. Now there are two ways you can nest. You can do a drag and drop, which I find depending on my mouse and the device I'm using may not be as consistent as cutting and pasting. So I'm going to use that method for this example. So I'm going to do a right click, cut. Then I'm going to click on the list. And instead of just doing a paste, I'm going to paste child. That's what's going to give me that nested interface. And we can see now that we have all the L1s underneath list. And when I basically compress that, all of the list elements go away and then I have them back. So that's for a simple list. There is an example in the files that you're going to have access to for a more complicated list. I'm going to forego that right now just to keep this kind of at a top level and make sure that I make it through all of the areas that I wanted to cover today. But if we have time, I can always go back and I can talk a little bit more about a more complicated list and a more complicated table. I'm just trying to keep an eye on the time here. All right, let's move down to artifacts. So what is an artifact? An artifact is an important piece of information, but not necessarily to the content or the context of the document. So what I mean by that is it may have been created for a visual impact, but it's not going to help someone who's using a technology reader. So I'm going to just equate that to clutter. And let's talk about what some of those might be. Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs before a graphic or an image. Each one of these has a blank paragraph in between it. So let me just go into H2 here, just so we know where we are. All right, we see the purple. I'm going to go down, I see that paragraph. And when I double click on the next one, I can see that I have this blank line. What the reader's going to do is say, according to the PDF UA ISO standard, and then when it gets seen that, it's going to go blank. Additionally, because there are not considered real content, blank. Now, individuals who are using assistive technology are probably used to that to a certain degree, but often when people use blank lines to end a page, it'll go blank, 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 and they're going to assume, many cases, that that's the end of the document when it's really not. So one of the things I like to do is I like to get rid of those blank lines, not visually, but through an artifacting process that we're going to walk through right now. And that way the individual does not get the blank described to them or input in that verbal translation of the accessible document. And we'll talk about how we handle that. And then we're going to talk about that in reference to this image too, because artifacting can have, it could also be in reference to a figure, and I'll explain in a little bit just about what that is. Okay, so I have this selected. And what we don't want to do is hit the delete key. We just find that we potentially run into problems. It works, it does delete it, but I think it's much better to go through the artifacting process to ensure that you don't have problems later on. All right, so let's right click here. We're going to go to reading order. And you can see that each paragraph is numbered until we get to this section. What I want to do is see these numbers associated with every single paragraph. And by default, my Acrobat is displaying like elements in a single block. I'm going to turn that off because I want to be able to see the fact that 18, 20, and 22 and 24 are blank lines. I'm going to click on that line, and I can also on the Mac do an option click if I'd like to do more at the same time, or control click on a PC. And once I select content in this reading order interface, I see all of these different elements, and one of them is called background artifact. Now, when I click on that button, notice that 18 is going to drop down to identify the next paragraph because it will no longer recognize this blank line. And again, remember that this will not impact the visual integrity of this document. So I'm going to go ahead and click Artifact. Now I have 17, 18, 19, 20. I still have this spacing. I'm in good shape. All right. Now let's move down here to this figure. I'm going to just move this slightly to the right. All right. We have a figure of a dog, and the caption for that says, "My dog with his goofy grin." The caption in this case really is plenty to identify what that figure is. So I don't need the figure in the accessible screen reader and the caption in this case. I just need the caption. So I'm going to artifact two things here. One, I'm going to artifact the figure, and two, I'm going to artifact this paragraph. Unfortunately, when Microsoft Word creates a figure, it always creates a blank paragraph. So I'm going to click on this one, and I'm going to click on this and choose Artifact. Again, this is not going to make any difference whatsoever in the visual appeal or the visual look of this. It's just going to make it simpler for someone using assistive technology to get through that. All right. So when we talk about alternate text, that is typically because either the caption doesn't exist or the caption really doesn't describe the issue. Now, before we move on to the figure that comes after this, which is an example of where alternate text is going to be helpful, I want to take a look at this caption here. Let me just double click. There we go. All right. Notice that this is indicated in the tag tree as a P tag rather than a caption. Assistive technologies will typically not hiccup at this, but just to do things the way the standard would like you to do it, I'm going to go in and make sure that I identify this as a caption, C-A-P-T-I-O-N. And again, I could have done that right click and chosen that from a list. Hit tab, and I'm ready to move forward. All right, let's talk about this next one. This is actually a picture of Rob's outside. He was living in Seattle for quite a while, and a black bear came on a sunny day up their driveway. So what the caption says is, a new neighbor comes to visit, which is really nice and cute, but it's not going to indicate to the listener what this is. So in this case, I'm going to just close this for just a moment. I'm going to move down to the next figure. And this is always a fun little challenge here. All right, let's go to the figure here. All right. I'm going to right click, go to properties, and let's just take a look at this section here that in the previous time I showed you this, it was blank. So in this case, when Rob was creating this document, he felt that, as I said, the new neighbor comes to visit is not going to give the reader any indication of who that new neighbor is. And you're going to miss the whole point that there's a black bear standing in the driveway. And because he lived in Seattle, sunny days were rare. So he put on a sunny afternoon. But this would be up to you to determine this. And this is one of the reasons why I use that Staples button. When we talk about figures, we usually need some sort of assistive brain power to make sure that it's clear. Let's just use the example of a red barn. You have a figure of a red barn or an image of a red barn. Why is that red barn important in the context of this document? Is it because it's an example of a barn that's going to house a certain number of animals and feed because you're doing a document on agriculture? Or is it a red barn because you were looking at the aesthetics of a photography exercise and you want to make sure that in Photoshop that red is true to what you saw? AI right now can do a lot of photo analysis. Anybody who needs proof of that, all you have to do is do a stock search in Adobe Stock. It is amazing what AI can analyze, but it's analyzing what those pieces are. It's not really giving the context of why is that image important to this document. So those are some of the reasons why with figures we need to go in and we need to provide that alternate text, or we need to make sure that the captions are sufficient to give that individual an idea of why there was an image and what it was trying to convey to the reader. All right, let's move on to tables. And we have two examples of tables here. We have a very simple table that has column headings, and then we have a little bit more complex table because not only does it have column headings, it also has row headings and it has merged columns. So this brings in a whole new level of information that we may need to modify to make it clear to assistive technologies. Let's just start though with the simple table first. All right, I just want to make sure I'm doing this in the right order as I'm sitting here talking. First off, no matter what tool you use as a source file, you are going to need to do something for a table in a PDF. The process has been simplified tremendously from previous versions, but there's still a couple of things we need to do. So I'm going to go down to the table, make sure that this is exactly what's highlighted. Notice that we see each cell having that purple square. And in this case, I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to my table editor. When I do that, I can see that any data cell is marked as gray. Any column heading is marked with red. How do I change those, which they are editable? Instead of choosing table editor, let's see, wait a second. I need to select something first. Let me just go in and select this one. There we go. Come on. There we go. You see I have table editor options and I have cell properties. I'm going to go to my editor options just for a moment. And this is where I can select my color options. These are the defaults, but I just wanted everyone to know where they can go if they want to change those, if red and gray are not appropriate for you. All right, if instead I go to my cell properties, you can see that right now I have this marked as a header cell, which is true, but I need to add the scope. By default, any header cell is going to be assumed to be a column heading. And in this case, that's true. That's not going to necessarily be true in the next table. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to hold down my shift key, highlight these 4 cells so I can do this a little bit faster. Again, go to my cell properties, and in the scope, I'm going to make sure that the program knows that these are column headings. And click OK. Then I always want to go back, do a spot check, just to be sure that it did change all these. Sure enough, header cell, column. All right. Sometimes your data cells will come up as headings, and actually that is the case here. I've got ruby red, midnight black, and triple yellow. These are not necessarily headings of any kind, so I'm going to select these 3. Again, go to cell properties, and I want these to be data cells. So now I just have my headings, and I have the colors, SUVs, sedans, or trucks. Now, if you did want these to be row headings, just because it had that extra significance or there's something else that's part of this, then you can do so. In fact, that's what we're going to do in this next table. So I'm going to scroll down to the next table. And let's just double click, make sure I have that information selected, and I do. I'm going to go to my table editor. And I can see that I have column headings and I have row headings, but because the scope has not been identified, Susan, Bill, and Jeff are most likely misidentified as column headings rather than row headings. So I'm going to go back here just for a moment to this slide that talks about our tables. What I'm looking for is the, hang on. As you can see, this stuff is all included. Just want to make sure I've got that. Nope, must be further up. Actually, I'm just going to open up the Word document to show you. Hang on. All right. For anybody who is editing in Microsoft Word, I didn't want the list, I want the tables. Here we go. In Microsoft Word, when you click in a table, you are going to see a tab at the top that says Table Design. When I click on that, it's going to show me all types of layout information, border stuff, but what I'm focused on here is the far left. If you select header row and first column, and you use either the Acrobat plugin, which is automatic, it's at no cost when you have Microsoft tools and you have Acrobat, or if you do a save as PDF, that information will carry through to the PDF document. So let's go back here, and this is what we're getting. It can take you so far, but not the whole way. So first of all, I'm going to click on Susan, Bill, and Jeff. Go to my cell properties. Again, those are header cells, but the scope needs to be row. And again, this is one of those must versus it's okay if you don't. But what I am going to do, just to be sure that these are identified correctly, is go across the top. Again, cell properties, header cell, but these are column headings. Previously, merged cells were not supported in an accessible PDF, but they are now. And we're going to talk about how we go in there and make sure that this is identified properly. All right, so I'm going to go back and click just on Q1 2015, cell properties. I'm going to take this a step further. So we have the header cell identified, we have the scope as column, but what I need to do is make sure that it knows it is spanning 3 columns so that that information is going to be conveyed properly. Don't worry about row span. The only time you would need a row span is, it's very rare, it's where that cell is going to be both a column and a row identifier. So in most cases, you're going to be working just with column span. Now, the reason this message comes up, which says changing the span attribute may result in a malformed table structure. The table editor may not be able to display the table structure correctly. Do you want to proceed? And that's because of this change that's going on in the standard, that it can now support merged cells. So I'm just going to go ahead and say, yes, I'm happy about that. And then I would just go ahead and repeat that through the table. Okay. All right, we have just about 15 minutes, so I want to make sure I get to links. And I want to talk about alternate text for figures, just because this is a slightly different strand to what I was talking about previously. I have some photos that have no captions, and so I'm going to want to create some alternate text for these so that they read properly. So I'm going to go down to figure. And let's see here, go to I'm looking for my alternate text. Sorry, everybody. Why? Hang on. That is not what I'm looking for. Sorry about that, everyone. And I don't think that's in my reading order either. Oh, I know why. Sorry about that. I need to switch keys here. I'm going to go up and click on my arrow key, click on the image, and that's not working for me either. I just got back from a sabbatical, and since my last update with my iOS, I am having some definite issues here. Did that come up? Nope. All right, we're going to skip that for the moment and we're going to do links really quick, and then I'm going to come back to that. All right. Sorry about this, you guys.
You're doing fine, Donna.
All right, I'm going to open up another list document. This is going to, not list, sorry, links document. There's something I want to make sure everybody's aware of when creating a PDF. If I use the Acrobat plugin, right, or I use Save to PDF, any links that I have in a document are going to come into that PDF accurately. But if I print to PDF, sometimes we refer to this as creating a flat PDF, and it means that not all the information is going to be there. You can add tag tree elements, but it is not going to provide what you need for a link that is embedded. So let's take a look at these 3 links here. I have an embedded link, Adobe Accessibility website. I have a shortened URL and I have a full URL. The 2 of these are going to come through when I ask Acrobat to add those elements, but the embedded one is not. So I want to go through and show you how we do that. But the first thing I'm going to do is open up that links PDF because I want to show you what you want to make sure that you have. So I'm going to go to my tag tree, go down to my, let's see, H2, unroll this. I see that I have an embedded hyperlink. I go below that, I can see that there is the link, and this is what we're looking for, link hyphen OBJR. In order for a link to be recognized properly, and you can see this right down here, we need the link OBJR. Now, sometimes you're going to see what that link is showing you is going to take you to some sort of a little summary of that, whether it's Adobe website or whether in this case it's Adobe Accessibility, but the order won't matter of these 2. I could have one before the other. What's important is that you've got to have the visual of link OBJR. So let's go back to that Word document. I'm going to create a PDF, but I'm not going to use the route that I should be doing. I'm going to do this a little bit differently. Let's make this a PDF. And we see that we have best for electronic distribution and accessibility. That's the button that you really always want to make sure is on unless you're doing something specifically for a printer that you know may require a more stripped down version. I typically use for printers today, I'm not going to offset printers like I used to years ago. I typically use this best for electronic anyway, because in most cases, they're wanting a PDF with as much information, but we still have people who end up either print to PDF or do best for printing. So let me go ahead and export that. Actually, yeah, that's okay. Actually, I want to make sure that goes to a different location. Sorry, you guys. Export. Nope, I don't want it to do that. Okay, so this is the one that I chose best for printing. And if I click on tags, I can see that there are no tags available. If you're in this situation, you cannot go back to the source document. Your only choice is to ask basically Acrobat to provide that information for you. So I'm going to go, let me see if I can right click on this. I'm going to right click and say add tags to document. Acrobat's going to do the best job it can at identifying the editorial elements, links, whatever it may be, and adding that to the document. Let's just see what happens here. All right, so it went through, it analyzed the document, and now when I go to my tags, I see that I do have a tag tree. But if we take a look at some of these, let's go to embedded. One more down. We can also see that if this was supposed to be a heading and just not highlighted text, that's not the right tag for that. And I can see that I don't have that information. Now let's go down to, let's say, the full URL and kind of hone our way down through that. Nope, I don't want figure. There we go. I'm just going to keep unrolling these, and you can see under link, I have link OBJR. So how am I going to get this embedded link further up the page inside of the document? I'm going to make sure that I have my arrow key selected. I'm going to highlight that text and essentially go through the steps that I would have done in the source document. And I want to create link. I want to go to a web page. And I'm just going to say www.adobe.com/accessibility. By the way, Adobe has a dedicated accessibility site. I didn't mention that earlier. That gives information about our products. And it's a pretty extensive web page, so please feel free to look at that at any time you're looking for more accessibility information. I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now that has been placed in the document with its link OBJR. So this is just impacts embedded links, and you're going to essentially, I think everyone has probably created a link either in Outlook or they've created a link inside of a Word document. You're going to pretty much just identify the same things. You're telling it what type of a link it is. If it's a URL, what is that URL, so that it can go ahead and include it, and it will automatically be included in the tag tree. All right, so that's links. Let me just make sure I haven't missed anything. All right, let's go back to the presentation. I want to just click on a few of these just to show everybody that when you download the PDF of that presentation, you are going to have access to a lot of these instructions and how they are related to the files that are there. You can see that lots of things that you're seeing here are the things that I walked through. So I would suggest that, one, if you want to just continue with this basic understanding of how to create and remediate a PDF for accessibility, download these files so you don't have to start with something that is yours that you may not have a one-to-one correlation. Practice this a little bit. I really recommend that you listen to some of Rob's webinars. It is such a great opportunity to be able to have access to these webinars for free that Rob does all over the country. And it will give you a much more in-depth understanding of creating accessible PDFs, as well as helping your coworkers or determine what are the best steps for people in your organization to create accessible PDFs. I also want to go back and just review these few slides. Remember, the webinar recordings are the ones that are specific for Acrobat accessibility. And then, of course, we have all of these. If anybody is interested in going through the accessibility checker, this is a great link. This is a great link to to go through that. What does the accessibility checker provide you? How do you, what's the best way to remediate anything that it comes up with as a notification? But you are going to have to do the tag tree edits, which is why I really wanted to focus on that today. I hope nobody was overwhelmed, and I'm looking forward to hearing how you guys do with accessibility. In education, this has to be the most common topic that we talk about with our customers. We don't see this as much in our retail environment, commercial environment. We do see it in government, but the education world really has this onus that they must try as hard as they can to create accessible documents. So please take advantage of these resources to make that easier. All right, any last minute questions, Bonnie, from anyone?
I don't have any questions in the chat. Does anybody want, I can unmute you if you have any questions. I guess not.
Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. And my email is, in fact, let me go ahead and put that in the chat pod. Oh, come on. Let me put this in the chat really quickly. This is my email. If you end up having any issues with the files later on or with the presentation, please let me know and I'll make sure that I get those files to you, even if I need to send those directly to you. All right, thank you everyone again. Take care.